The first day of autumn 1939 has forever entered the history of mankind. Using a trumped-up accusation of a Polish attack on a German radio station, Nazi Germany launched a large-scale invasion of Poland under the pretext of retaliatory measures. This act of aggression served as the trigger for the beginning of the most devastating conflict in history, the Second World War. The Polish Republic found itself in a catastrophic situation when the Soviet Union struck from the east on September 17. Caught between two aggressors, the country was fighting an unequal battle on two fronts. On September 28, Warsaw capitulated to the German troops, and the very next day, according to the secret agreements of the non-aggression pact, the Third Reich and the USSR divided the Polish territories among themselves. The beginning of terror. After the defeat of the Polish armed forces, a systematic campaign of extermination began. The German occupiers viewed Poles as representatives of an inferior race. In the first weeks after the invasion, SS, police and Wehrmacht units shot thousands of civilians. Representatives of the Polish elite, the aristocracy, clergy, scientists and cultural figures, were particularly severely persecuted. About 1.8 million Jews remained in the territories controlled by Germany, who were driven into ghettos. After the attack on the USSR in the summer of 1941, more than 3 million Polish Jews were deported to Nazi death camps. One of these places of mass destruction was the Stutthof concentration camp, where one of the most brutal guards, Gerda Steinhoff, served. On January 29, 1922, in Danzig, modern Gdansk, a girl named Gerda was born into a Protestant family. At that time, the city had the status of the Free City of Danzig, a special administrative unit under the protectorate of the League of Nations. This status arose after the First World War. According to the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the victorious powers, the United States, Great Britain, France and their allies, imposed severe territorial, military and economic restrictions on the defeated Germany. One of the conditions was the transfer of West Prussia, including Danzig, to the revived Polish state. The predominantly German city received the status of a free city under the protection of the League of Nations, but with special administrative ties with Poland. The League of Nations was the first global intergovernmental organization whose main goal was to maintain world peace. However, Germany took the loss of this city painfully. After Adolf Hitler came to power in January 1933, a systematic revision of the Versailles system began. In May of the same year, the Nazis became the dominant force in Danzig. Anti-Polish sentiments increased dramatically, and a policy of Germanization and segregation unfolded. In 1935, the Jewish community turned to the League of Nations for help, but the organization had already lost its former influence. Since 1937, German companies were forbidden to hire Poles, and those who already worked were fired. The Polish language was banned in public places, and Poles were denied service in many establishments. After the Kristallnacht pogroms in November 1938, racial laws were introduced in the city. Most of the Jews emigrated, leaving only 4,000 people. On December 17, 1938, the Jewish community publicly declared its readiness to leave the city. At that time, Gerda worked in a bakery and then became a tram conductor. When the war broke out on September 1, 1939, the Polish garrison of Danzig held out until September 7. After the fall of the city, up to 4,500 representatives of the Polish minority were arrested, and many were executed. Hundreds of Poles were subjected to brutal experiments, including the castration of men and the sterilization of women, who were considered a threat to the purity of the Nordic race. The judicial system became an instrument of extermination. Sentences were passed on the basis of the thesis about the subhuman nature of Poles. By the time Danzig joined the Reich in September 1939, 1,600 Jews remained in the city. Emigration continued until the fall of 1940, and in February 1941, the last 600 Jews were deported to their deaths. The Stuttgart concentration camp. In September 1939, the Germans set up a camp in a wooded area west of the town of Stutthof, 35 kilometers from Danzig. The original camp was surrounded by barbed wire, and 8 barracks for prisoners were built by the prisoners themselves in 1940. The camp was established as part of an ethnic cleansing program aimed at eliminating the Polish elite, the intelligentsia, religious and political leaders. Even before the war, the Germans compiled lists of people to be arrested and secretly searched for places for concentration camps. At first, Stutthof functioned as a civilian internment camp run by the Danzig police. In November 1941, it became a forced labor camp for political prisoners under the control of the SD Security Service. In January 1942, Stutthof received the status of a full-fledged concentration camp under the jurisdiction of the SS. Expansion of the death camp. In 1943, the camp was significantly expanded. The new part included 30 barracks surrounded by an electrified fence. In the same year, a crematorium and a gas chamber were built, just in time for the start of the massacres, when in June 1944, Stutthof was included in the program of the final solution of the Jewish question. The gas chamber could accommodate up to 150 people in one procedure. Gradually, Stutthof turned into an extensive network of 105 branches throughout northern and central occupied Poland. Tens of thousands of people, possibly up to 100,000, have passed through the camp system. The majority were non-Jewish Poles. The conditions of detention were monstrous. Many died during typhus epidemics in the winter of 1942 and 1944. Those whom the guards considered too weak to work were gassed. The Zyklon B massacres began in June 1944, when 4,000 prisoners, including Jewish women and children, were killed before the camp was evacuated. Camp doctors killed the sick and wounded with lethal injections of phenol. In total, more than 60,000 people died in Stuttgart and its branches. The service of Gerda Steinhoff. On January 25, 1944, Gerda got married and soon gave birth to a child. In June of the same year, the SS began mobilizing women from Danzig and the surrounding area to serve as wardens due to severe staff shortages following the establishment of the Bromberg OST women's branch in Bydgoszcz. Gerda, who worked as a conductor, got involved in this mobilization. Until October 31, 1944, she served in the branch of Stutthof SK3, where 400 women and children were under her supervision. From October 31 to December 1, she was a senior supervisor at the Danzig home branch, and from December 1, 1944 to January 18, 1945, she held the same position at Bromberg OST. In all the camps, Steinhoff proved herself to be a ruthless supervisor. She became famous for beating female prisoners, including children, to death with her bare hands or with a whip. In addition, she participated in the selection of prisoners to be sent to the gas chambers. On January 25, 1945, she was awarded the Iron Cross for her exemplary service. Evacuation and liberation. The evacuation of the Stutthof camp system began in January 1945. By the time the final evacuation began, there were about 50,000 prisoners in the camps, the vast majority of them Jews. About 5,000 people from the branches were driven to the Baltic Sea, driven into the water and machine gunned down. The rest were driven towards Lauenburg in East Germany, but the path was blocked by Soviet troops. The Germans turned the columns back to Stuttgart. In the bitter cold, under the bullying of the guards, thousands died during this death march. At the end of April 1945, the remaining prisoners were evacuated by sea, as Stutthof was completely surrounded by the Red Army. And again, hundreds of people were driven into the sea and shot. It is estimated that more than 25,000 people died during the evacuation, 1 in 2. When Soviet troops entered Stutthof on May 9, 1945, they found only about 100 prisoners who had managed to hide. In total, approximately 100,000 people passed through the camp, 60,000 of them died, and another 22,000 were transferred to other camps. Trial and execution. Shortly before the end of the war, Steinhoff escaped from the camp and returned home. On May 25, 1945, she was arrested. The first Stutthof trial began on April 25, 1946. Steinhoff and her accomplices have protested their innocence. The women didn't seem to take the process seriously. They giggled and joked during the meetings. The verdict was handed down on May 31. Gerda Steinhoff was sentenced to death by hanging for her participation in breeding and sadistic abuse of prisoners. When she heard the verdict, she burst into tears. Public execution. The execution was carried out in public and turned into a gruesome sight captured by official photographers. After the war, Poland carried out only 3 public executions of war criminals. One of them took place on the hill of Biskupia Górka near Gdansk. On July 4, 1946, 11 Nazi criminals from Stutthof, including 24-year-old Gerda Steinhoff, were hanged in front of 200,000 people. That day, the hill experienced a real siege. 3 days later, the newspapers announced the date of the execution. Businesses have declared a day off and organized transportation. Anyone could come. The security forces were afraid of lynching. The police and the army could hardly contain the huge crowd. July 4th turned out to be hot. The sun was shining. At exactly 1700, 11 open trucks delivered the condemned men, 6 men and 5 women with their hands and feet tied. The trucks backed up under the gallows. The convicts were placed on folding sides or chairs. Former prisoners of Stuttgart in striped robes volunteered as executioners and threw nooses. The execution was planned so that after the departure of the trucks, the condemned would hang at a low height. A short fall did not break their necks. The criminals died a painful death from suffocation within 10 to 20 minutes. When the first truck carrying Johann Pauls, the former head of security, started moving, he managed to shout "Heil Hitler." The crowd responded with curses. While Paul's body was still twitching, the next truck started moving, and the next criminal began his rope dance. The rest of the convicts could watch what awaited them. When one driver's engine stalled, the former prisoner pushed the condemned man off the platform. The crowd was shouting, "For our husbands, for our children." After the death of the last criminal, the guards allowed people to approach. The crowd tore off buttons, cut off pieces of cloth, kicked bodies. Then the people were dispersed, and the bodies were sent to the Medical University of Gdansk for anatomical classes. No one shed a single tear about Gerda Steinhoff and her followers.